Michael, you can take a seat between Jockey and Robbie before we start. So, Nicholas, I can take this one here. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so how we're going to have this conversation today is that I'll ask a couple of questions to our panelists. Hopefully we get maybe about a good 30 to 45 minutes out of that, and then we go to the audience so that we can have a discussion and some questions. Hopefully we'd be able to do that, COVID protocols being observed, of course. I think a mic will be set up for everybody who has a question to ask it to any one of our panelists. And of course, let us be respectful of the discussion of the panelists and of one another. If we want this discussion to be as robust as possible, let's try and keep it at a question or a very short comment, a very short one. Sawa sawa? We are agreed. Thank you very much. All right, so lady and gentlemen, Jockey, I'd like to start with you. I guess we'll be passing the microphone back and forth between one another. Or there are microphones coming. Ah, fantastic. So as a microphone is brought to the stage, Jockey, you represent what is perhaps the new face of the defense of democracy and social justice in Kenya. We have at the last count that I made, at least 15 social justice centers across the country. I'm sure I might be wrong given that I checked a long time ago. And these are now the people and the organizations that are at the forefront of fighting for democracy in this country in various ways. So I'd like to start with what you think is wrong with our democracy in Kenya from the point of view of social justice centers, but of course, presenting your own views as well.
Thank you very much. We are currently at 19 social justice centers in Nairobi, and I think 43, 44 across the country. So a lot of organizing has been going on, especially in the informal settlements. When you ask what is wrong with democracy currently in Kenya, I would say everything. And really, I will start with why even the social justice centers, there was that need for the young people to now organize and come up with the social justice centers. Because for one, the young people were really tired of having their stories being told by someone else. And it was time that the youth actually come up and tell their own stories in their own way, so that it matters because of all the injustices that are going on in this country, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. You hear people talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, and in the ghettos, it's a whole new story, you know. Poverty is a pandemic that we're dealing with in itself. So when you talk about democracy and what is wrong with democracy in our country, the fact that we have people in power who run their own interest and not the interest of the people, people who do not care about the law, people who do not lead the government through the human rights approach, it is very problematic because then at the end of the day, it is the people who suffer, you know. And when we were having this discussion, I hoped that the IEBC would be here because there's this one question that I've really wanted to ask them. In this country, do we have selections or elections?
Michael is right next to you. Yes. He's right next to you and you should be able to yeah, please carry on.
Yeah, because there's no way we can have a conversation about democracy and not have a conversation about, do the people really have the chance to actually elect the people that they want? Does it really matter when we wake up at 3 a.m. to go and queue and choose the leaders that we think would make a change in our lives. So that is where I would want us to start this conversation about democracy.
Thanks a lot for
Check 1, 2.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Joki, for that question. How do I start? We, as an EMB basically means election management body in this country, we are charged with overseeing elections and referenda. And it is also important for us to realize that we are just one of the stakeholders. I know it's a very critical job that we do, but sometimes Kenyans forget and think that everything election rests with the commission. But we have to work hand in hand with so many stakeholders. We have, for instance, the national police, the judiciary, the political parties, the politicians themselves, NCIC, things to do with hate speech, even civil society. Like, that's the reason I'm here. So it's an all-inclusive role. So going towards your question, what we do is very regulated. We work in a very regulated environment. We basically apply the law and regulations. We have very little room for, can I say, activism, without being seen in a derogatory light. But you know very well that everything that the commission does is looked at in, very critically. Sometimes it is given very adverse interpretation. And everybody goes to court for whatever reason, as far as the commission is concerned. But Joki, I can assure you that as a commission, we play our role according to the law. We basically apply the law as is, and we do it to the best of our ability, from working with the parties to make sure that they adhere to democratic principles, to primaries, that is nominations, we oversee that, and the elections themselves. Whether we do it right or not right is very difficult for me as an insider to state, but what I can assure you is that as an election management body, we do whatever it takes. We make all the necessary arrangements, and we do all the necessary planning. As we speak, we launched our strategic plan the other day to guide us. That is 5 years from 2020 to 2024. We also launched our election operation plan to guide us on the way forward. And I can assure you that as members of staff and management, we are committed to actually make sure that what we have are elections and not selections.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. We're going to come back to the role of the IBC because it's very critical in ensuring that we have a functioning democracy, and the centerpiece of any functioning democracy, of course, are credible elections, and that's something that we need to speak a bit more about. Mutemi, I'd like to bring you into this discussion this morning going into afternoon, right? Same question that I asked Njoki. What is wrong, or let me take the value proposition out of it and ask it as a question. What is your view of our democracy in Kenya today?
Thank you so much, John Allan, for the question. Thank you, my fellow panelists, and Forum Civ for organizing this event, this panel. In my view, and I think I'll use the IBC as an example, not using you as a punching bag. We talk about democracy being government by the people, for the people. And if we can speak about elections over the last, since 2007, when we had the PV and then the reforms, the electoral justice reforms that happened thereafter. Quigrad talked about not being able to, at the end of the election, not being able to tell who has voted and who has not voted, although there's a voters register. And I think we've been trying to mitigate that, to make sure that there's accountability in terms of the voter register, in terms of who has voted. You know, we've implemented different measures, including electronic and digital equipment to be able to, you know, like capture that data. But then we know that in 2013 and 2017, an organization that, for example, streams movies that are 2 GB could not send SMSs of electoral data. That's less than 30 MB, you know? And as our colleague has talked about what role they play as staff of IEBC, and I think he gave examples of other people who are involved in elections. I think what we were saying is that we do our part, but then other people are involved, and maybe that's where the shenanigans happen. What we've seen is that Kenyans vote peacefully. They wake up very early, go and vote, and they vote peacefully, and then go home. And then what happens after voting is where the problem is. The counting. We can't count votes. We've not been able to count votes since 2007. And so, for me, that's the state of our democracy. And I think it's what the retired Chief Justice was talking about, is that not yet democracy. Because we have people who have interests, and they're able to influence the counting of votes after the voting. You know, so in my view, these are some of the things we need to address, and it's again not bashing IBC, just pointing out in the recent case, the BBI case, IBC has gone all the way to the Supreme Court right now, and I'm wondering who's making those decisions. You know, you're supposed to be an electoral management body. You're supposed to be appreciating all these interpretations by courts that should make your work easier, but you're fighting the courts. I mean, what does that mean? Because if the courts say, both the High Court and the Court of Appeal say you've not followed the right procedures, if I was the chairman of the commission, I would say, let's go back and make sure that we comply with the orders of the court. But these guys are fighting to be able to go on with the shenanigans. And what kind of democracy is that? So that's my view on that question. Thank you.
Mutemi, as we discuss elections, and of course, elections, like I said, are a centerpiece of any vibrant democracy. There are other parts of democracy that I think you can speak also very fluently about. Outside, as you were registering to join, I said that it was good to see that you weren't in jail for something that you tweeted or something that you said online. Freedom of expression is a core tenet of any democracy. Now, you've been at the forefront of that. You have said things that perhaps people don't like, and you've been jailed for it. Just walk us through that experience, perhaps with the view of what that means for democracy generally. Because you're not the only person now who has been victimized for the things that they've said, not so much even the things that they've done.
Again, that's a very good question. And from a personal experience is someone who speaks truth to power with love, we have a new constitution that passed in 2010, not so new, but not fully implemented, I think, as the CJ was pointing out. And we have people who empower, the politicians who are in power. I don't want to call them leaders because I think they don't show any leadership qualities, whose sole purpose is to try and re-centralize, because the constitution decentralized power, which was very deliberate. That was like trying to get out of the colonial state that was extracting and giving to a few. The constitution decentralized power by taking it to the counties, as much as there's corruption, but at least decisions are being made at that level in terms of how to use resources and that kind of thing. And so part of the fight to re-centralize is where freedom of expression, freedom of speech, being able to, as was very evident in the two judgments by the High Court and the Court of Appeal, those are monumental judgments, is the role of public participation in the Constitution, in management of public affairs. And that talks about freedom of expression. It's Kenyans getting involved in saying, these are how you're going to use my resources. These taxes I pay. And part of the attempt to re-centralize and not implement the Constitution has been to avoid that, because it's protracted. If people are going to get involved, Kenyans, he gives you 5 shillings, he or she gives you 5 shillings, they're going to make sure that you account for that 5 shillings. And so we've been deliberately not implementing that, because we know how problematic it is if these people are scrutinizing everything that you're doing. We've not done political education, we've not done civic education, whereby Kenyans are able to understand budgets and interrogate them, so that I think one county that has done that is Makueni, whereby there are village councils that determine what projects are going to be implemented. But largely across the country, we've not done that. You remember the first thing that Uhuru Kenyatta's government did in 2013 was buy medical equipment. That's what decentralization is about. It's one person making a decision in terms of procurement, but then health had been devolved. And so we saw that attempt, and some counties didn't take up those machines. And that's the Kenya that we don't want to go to. And the more we say we don't want that kind of Kenya, we want, if I'm selling machines, medical machines to government, I need to negotiate with 47 county governments, and then the 48th being the national government, so that I can prove that this value addition to these machines to the counties, and I have to convince each and every county. And people don't want that. They want one central place where I go and I meet somebody at Moderator Club or at a current club, and you make a decision, and I'm given a tender to to supply those machines. This is part of the struggle IEBC has also been having with this equipment. So freedom of expression, and then is trying to shut people who challenge, who point out that we need to participate. Remember the campaign that the second arrest was around the IMF. And IMF was coming to give, to try and help us mitigate our carelessness, misuse of resources. We're not even talking about the World Bank. That's the one that gives loans. And then most of these loans that are given to the health sector are stolen, and they don't ask for accountability. And then their other arm comes to help us manage our indebtedness. Yet they're the ones who gave us these loans that were stolen, and they didn't ask for accountability. So this kind of things, of course, the people in power don't ask those questions. So that's the kind of, those arrests.
In a word, Mutemi, are you concerned about the state of freedom of expression as we go into such a politically charged environment?
I am concerned, but I'm also very encouraged, because Kenyans have refused to shut up, and Kenyans have taken up spaces like Twitter, Facebook, and wherever, and they're organizing themselves and they're pushing back. It's not as, it might not be, if you look at the investment the government has put in terms of managing communications, PR, hiring Cambridge Analytica, it's a recognition of what they face, and an awakening population that is not letting things just slide. So I'm concerned in terms of the character of our politicians, and in terms of them inciting their constituencies, saying we are fighting, I don't know, people are talking about peace. Like, which Kenyans are fighting, What is happening in Laikipia is basically politicians trying to displace some people for the other election. So I'm concerned in that aspect, but in terms of Kenyans themselves, the people, the majority of the people, I'm encouraged by the fact that they are engaging in their politics. So we're not yet democratic, but we're getting there.
We were getting there. And one of the bastions of democracy latter day, praised very recently, has been the judiciary, right? Specifically for the quality of the judgments that were made both at the High Court and the Supreme Court on the BBI process. But if you're even looking back to, 5 years and 12 days ago with that judgment from Chief Justice David Maraga and the Supreme Court bench, it looks as if that's the one area in which democracy is being protected. But if you read The Nation yesterday, there was an article about an unnamed judge who had applied to become the Chief Justice, who was engaged in very, very serious, or alleged to be engaged in very, very serious acts of corruption. And ask many Kenyans, and the journey that someone has to go through to be able to get a judgment in the judiciary is a very long and arduous one, to the extent that certain people are just not going to bother. So Robi, you're a young lawyer. You've practiced for some time, but now you are faced with, dealing with this arm of government on a daily basis, right? But also dealing with these different faces as we think about our democracy. What's the state of the democracy, of Kenya's democracy, if you were to look at it from the point of view of the judiciary? Are we moving forward, or are we taking 2 steps back as well?
Thanks, Allan, for that question. I think I'll start with what's good about the judiciary right now. And one of that, as Mutemi has rightly said, is we have a citizenry that is very hungry to participate and be involved and to change the culture in this country. And that's true freedom of expression. And so you see a level of accountability. People question various decisions on Twitter, even on some of the TV stations and talk shows. Some of the tweets that come up are very deep and sensitive questions. Secondly, we have a constitution that is very strong in so many aspects. Even the aspect of the judiciary within the constitution, the level of separation that has been provided for the judiciary right now. But then you also realize that there's a level of checks and balances between the different arms of government. And so that's where I think I am a bit uncomfortable with where things are right now. Because what it has done is, over the last maybe 4 years, we've seen a downshift in the amount of money that the judiciary receives in terms of funding to run its activities. And this was an issue for the former Chief Justice Maraga, and I think even Willie Mutunga at some point, in the sense of asking the executive and even parliament or treasury to provide more money so that courts are able to be decentralized, as Mutemi is saying, so that they're able to reach a lot more people. Because to be quite honest, I think the judiciary has been that, back for the people, where most of the judgments that come out of the judiciary are very strong in a sense, but when it gets to, say, the Attorney General, for example, and this is, I think, my concern with these public institutions, why is, for example, the Attorney General, going ahead to appeal a decision that is very strong in a sense, and his appeal would seem to support very few individuals within government and some of them out of government. And so it sort of feels like there's no sense of ownership or belonging for me as a citizen, let alone me as a lawyer, in that sense of what does the government want for me in this process. The court has spoken on this issue. Why can't they just, take that up? And I also understand that, speaking that way, there's also the part that everyone has a right to appeal, a decision. But if you think about it critically, and Mutemi has put it very nicely, for example, the decisions on the IEBC were to make it better, make it more representative, make it more, accountable to procedures and ideals. But then when you appeal to those decisions, it then means that what you're saying is we don't want to be as accountable as you'd want us to be, and so let's push back a bit. So with regard to the judiciary, I think there have been very many steps that have been made progressively, but there's also a challenge with some cartels, for example. So there has been an issue, I think, recently with the online e-filing platform of the court. Just recently, there have been costs that have been, increased, very greatly. And I think those would affect the citizen, not as much as they would affect the lawyers or those accessing courts. And then the last bit, I think, which I think is also a difficulty, is in enforcement of these court orders. So we've seen, public officials flagrantly refusing to obey court orders, refusing to show up in court, refusing to, respect warrants of arrest or, guidelines provided by the court, which then makes anyone else as a citizen to feel, why should I, obey some of these orders if our own public officials and public institutions cannot, respect them and obey them to the level that they should.
So, to be frank, is the problem of the judiciary the executive? Because in any one of the instances that you've mentioned, whether it's funding of the judiciary or specifically respect of court orders, there is one elephant in the room that we are not mentioning by name. So is the problem of the judiciary the executive?
I'd say yes. And I'm saying that yes very strongly, because to a large extent, the executive should have, the sort of responsibility. And let's just go back a bit to when, the judgment you're talking about of the Supreme Court with regard to the last election. If you think about it from that perspective, some of the pronouncements that are coming out of that, in the sense of, we'll pay back or we'll push back. I don't remember what the exact words, but it sort of felt,
revisit.
Yeah, we shall revisit this decision. That is a very strong pronouncement from the same people who should be, if not to a large extent, supporting, each other, because it's sort of like a, how do I call it? It's like balancing sort of levels at which we operate in. And if that balance is not there or doesn't seem to be there, then it means that there will be one institution that will feel like they're under the whims of the other sort of institution, in this case the executive. Yeah. So with some of the budget cuts, what the executive has argued is, we have more pressing issues and concerns, but to the largest extent possible, I feel that the judiciary being, the last sort of wing that would protect the people in that representative democracy, then it means that there's a problem if they're not provided with everything that they need to do adequately. Yeah. And this links particularly to, for example, the appointment of judges issue. We've seen the Court of Appeal is heavily understaffed. And so that's why cases are not able to move as fast as they need to move. But when names are recommended to the president for appointment, then there's a bit of pushback, and then suddenly files start popping up. He says the NIS has files on some individuals, and the question is, why were these not, why didn't these issues come up at the point of vetting? Or you also have the responsibility to sort of send it back to Parliament, or or the JSC, if you have to, for that to restart afresh. But now it seems to be an issue because the JSC is also saying that they're not able to initiate that conversation again without a proper, sort of recommendation and guidance from the appointing authority. So it seems to be a sort of tug of war, and we are the people who suffer at the end of it, because this is supposed to be an institution that protects us and serves us, and if they're not able to effectively, then it means that I will not be able to get justice, or anyone else will not be able to get justice.
True. Michael, let's bring in the IEBC for a moment and transpose this issue that the judiciary is facing to the IEBC. So, a central complaint about the IEBC that even went to the to the heart of the BBI ruling was that it wasn't constituted properly. Another issue that the IEBC has faced because of voter registration and all of the attendance steps that need to be taken before an election is held is funding. Right now, I believe you have an acting executive director of the Secretariat, right? Central figure when it comes to the management of the election. So you might have the plans and you might have the strategic plan, right? But there are these other very important steps that haven't been in place, and we are now 11 months away from an election. Why I ask this is and sort of like compare the two, IEBC and the judiciary, is through the force of the example of the former Chief Justices, David Maraga, Willie Mutunga, in terms of speaking out about some of the shortcomings that are not their fault. funding, for instance, and continually talking about the independence of the IEBC, of the judiciary. Why doesn't that happen with the IEBC?
Thank you, Mr. Allan, Namu. Yes, funding is a critical issue for the Commission because usually it's underfunded, and when it is funded, sometimes the funding most of the time the funding comes late. This has been aired many times. It has been aired many times, and there have been several meetings with the offices that are the relevant offices. Obviously, that affect the performance of the Commission because it will affect other matters to do with procurement and the rest, and generally the activities that are requisite to an election. We have an IEBC fund under the IEBC Act, which we've also been pushing to have operationalized. When that happens, then obviously it will give the Commission a very high level of independence compared to what it is now.
When should it have been operationalized?
Well, with the enactment of the IEBC Act.
So years ago.
It is there in the law, but it has not been operationalized. Mm-hmm. So obviously, when you get an itemized budget every time, it becomes difficult for you to really plan your activities. But talks are still ongoing, and we hope in the fullness of time, probably that will be actualized.
Okay, let me just jump in there for a moment. The judiciary, again, just to keep with this comparison, the judiciary has been accused of judicial activism, trying to create a constitutional monarchy, but simply it really revolves around them asking for what their rights are, right? And so in as much as you're saying the conversations have been ongoing, it feels like there isn't any force of will, just observing now as a Kenyan, like no one who really believes in the fact that the IEBC should be properly funded years in advance of an election, be independent years in advance of an election. Just walk us through what actually happened, because that's the perception out in the public, that IEBC will wait and wait and wait, or ask very feebly, and then ask for 40 billion shillings, right? So what are the steps?
Thanks for the question. We probably need to take cognizance of the fact that elections is a process. It's not an event. And many Kenyans out here think that elections is an event, so that we just go in August, we need 40 billion or whatever it is that I don't know which figure you said, to conduct an election. But you see, in the meantime, there are so many activities that are supposed to take place. We have voter education, we have continuous voter registration, we have procurements to be done. Some of them are supposed to be done well in advance, and that procurement is anchored in law, even issues to do with technology. So if we got this funding in good time, and if we got it in adequate amounts, then it will make it easier for our processes to go on. Now, it is not really for me to state, why we are not getting the funding, because I think all you can do is to request for this funding, because we are not the funding comes from somewhere else. I don't know whether there's anything more I can tell you other than that, but definitely we would be much better off if our funding came in good time and in good amounts.
Has the funding for the 2022 elections, for your elections plan, come through?
We have been given budget. There's difference between budget and exchequer.
Yes.
We've been given budget. We hope that we'll get exchequer in the fullness of time, and proceed with the initial stages, or basically the initial stages of planning the elections as we await further funding.
Has your calendar slipped because exchequer has not been provided?
Well, I would say we are not in the red. We are not in the red.
Are we in yellow? Are we in green? Where are we?
We're in the green. Mm-hmm. We're in the green. We'll be able to deliver an election.
And you're certain of that?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I want to come back to you, Njoki, and talk about what the perspective of the people is, once again, when it comes to not just elections, but generally speaking in terms of democracy. 2020 was perhaps one of the most violent years, specifically for one category of Kenyan, which is the youth, and inside that category, young men, right, with regard to extrajudicial killings, and some enforced disappearances, but mostly associated with enforcement of the protocols of the COVID-19 pandemic movement restrictions. Now, we're in a situation where whatever the reason, young men, young people across this country seem to be continually targeted by the state and by various other actors for violence, right? What are you hearing about what now the response is going to be? Because there can't be an action without some sort of reaction. What are you hearing on the ground from what, because of these kinds of things, what the likely reactions might be to this kind of treatment of young people, specifically young men?
I think the question should be what am I saying? Because I am from the ground, and what I say is what they are saying. You see, when you start the question and you say 2020 was a very difficult year, especially for the young men. But truthfully, especially for the young people who come from the informal settlements and areas of low-income earners in Kenya, being youth has always been criminal. The youth in this country have been criminalized. And so 2020, there was a lot of conversation about extrajudicial killings, conversation about police having killed more people than the pandemic at that particular time. But you see, this has been our reality for a very, very long time. And I remember, I think before around 2014, we would not have this conversation about extrajudicial killings like we are having right now. Because every time there was a conversation about a young man who's been killed in the ghettos, a young man who's been killed in the streets, it was always with a narrative of crime. This was a criminal who was gunned down, and people did not question until the young people started telling their stories, until we came out and started telling our stories. When a man is gunned down, we say, no, he was not. We know this guy. He's from our hood. He's from Mukuru. He's from Githurai. He's been a cobbler for all these years. We started giving faces to these stories that were statistics for a very long time. So that is where the conversation about extrajudicial killings started. But you see, one of the things that we, even as we're having conversations about violence and especially police abuse of power, we do not really interrogate is whose interest do the police serve? We still have a police that is founded on the colonial structures, what the colonialists left. And their interest is to protect the state or those who are in power, not the people. We've never really upset that status quo. And until we abolish and until we upset that status quo, we will still keep having these conversations. And the last few months we've been having this conversation about police brutality. And my personal take has been police brutality in itself is actually an oxymoron, because police in this current setting are supposed to be brutal. That is why they've been put there, to instill fear, especially in the ghettos, in the youth. When you reach 20 and you're from Madare, Krogocho, your mom actually gives you fare to go to the rural areas and Aucha. That is how they know how to keep you safe. Because it is actually an achievement for you to even get to 20 without having been criminalized, without having been dead, And unless we have conversations about, the structures that we have and who the masters are, then police brutality will keep being a conversation in boardrooms where we think we can have reforms about uniform, about changing the name from being a police force to being a police service. Yet every single day, they are using force against the youth of this country, you know? And I mean, it would make sense for the state to fear the youth, because that is where the energy is, that is where the revolution will be at, you know? So all these things are actually very deliberate. And I keep telling people, Moi said that Kanu will rule for 100 years. And people laughed. But this guy knew exactly what he was talking about, because he knew the people he had mentored. Those are the people who still hold power up to now, you know? And they are the biggest fans of violence and impunity. Our current regime right now is a regime that is no fan of law, has completely been stepping on constitutionalism, has disregarded the law left, right, and center, has used the police against the people to assert their power. So they have a reason to be afraid.
Let me jump in there. You've used a very important word, power, right? In our constitution, power is exercised directly or indirectly through various institutions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What I've heard from what you've just said is that the youth do not have the opportunity to exercise that power directly through these institutions that we are discussing today that are supposed to be defending democracy. How do we get young people to actually impose or exercise their power in a way that enhances Kenya's democracy? Because right now, what the conversation is can in many ways be looked at as, lamentations, right? We have complained, we have talked about extrajudicial killings, we have talked about the treatment of the youth and the criminalization of the youth. How do we get young people to engage in such a way that all of these institutions recognize the power that is within the youth and start to use that power on their behalf more responsibly?
That I am seated here today is actually proof enough that we're not complaining anymore as a youth of this country. The social justice centers and other social movements have actually been actively organizing in the grassroots. We're no longer complaining. We're actually taking action. We're offering a lot of political education, and there's a difference between political education and civic education. Yes, we want to, and we say this without fear, that we want to radicalize the youth of this country, because the youth of this country must take back this country, So gone are the days where we sit here and lament, oh, they're killing us. No, we will no longer sit and say, we will wait for them to stop killing us. We will no longer even go to boardrooms where we have these things they call police reforms working group, where we sit right beside those people who kill us and ask them, will you please stop killing us? No. We're actually on the ground every single day trying to have these conversations with the youth, telling them that Article 1 of the Constitution actually gives them the power, to take back this country, to offer the alternative leadership that the former Chief Justice was talking about, to be the change they want to see, Telling them that, giving them historical pretext, because you see the one thing that that has been very deliberate in this country is the wiping out of our history. Our history has been seriously doctored to celebrate the villains and to forget our heroes. In our political education, we are telling the true history. We're calling out the villains for who they are. Those we are told who are founding fathers, and the way they keep robbing this country till today. So through political education, we're giving the right history, and we're radicalizing the youth on the ground, telling them that it is time to take back their country.
Thank you very much, Njoki. Really powerful sentiments there. Yeah, let's give her a hand, actually. Yeah. Michael, you've heard Njoki's very impassioned, commentary about how the youth are going to get involved. The IBC, again, as a very important part of any democracy, has a very serious and bad legacy to contend with, right? Not just IBC as it currently is, but if we look back to every election that Kenya has had, perhaps save for the 2002 election, there have been questions about legitimacy. There have been questions about the vote itself. Mutemi said that since 2007, somehow we've forgotten how to count, right? And these are very serious issues that we need to contend with in advance of an election. Yeah, Article 82, I believe, it stipulates what an election should be, and especially in terms of the result and the vote. Simple, transparent, and inclusive. What guarantees do we have that what we saw in 2007, the infamous vifaranga vya computer, what we saw in 2013 with the claims, what we saw in 2007, what guarantees that can the IEBC state today that the youth who have been trying to exercise, to use their voice, can exercise it legitimately through a vote that will be shepherded in a simple, transparent, and inclusive way by the IEBC?
Thank you, John. And thanks, Njoki, for that very passionate submission. First of all, I wish to state that as a commission, we've been engaging with the youth. In fact, at a very high level, about 2 months ago, the commission hosted the National Youth Council in the boardroom. And, of course, there were deliberations and discussion about, working together, and they even promised a desk at every activity of the commission, including elections. I also agree with what Njoki states, that it is the youth themselves who really have to come out there and get involved in these political processes, either as voters or as participants. And I think, I don't know the demographics of this country, but I think the youth account for a very big percentage. 65%. And I want to agree with her that if there was full participation by the youth, then we probably will not even need affirmative action the way you have. Probably will not even need special seats per se, just going by the sheer numbers. I remember when the National Youth Council members visited the commission, I even gave them the example of the LSK, Wakili. One would even say that now the LSK leadership has been overrun by the youth. Okay, maybe let's not put a lot of emphasis on whatever is happening there. Let's look at the positive side. I think it is true. I mean, when I was joining the profession some years back, the leadership was actually made up of the older generation. But with time, it is really the older. Some of them, I think, are pretty young in terms of the years of practice, and I think that can be replicated in the national arena. So, as a commission, I think all we can do is to encourage the youth. Of course, we have voter education that goes on out there, which is a key mandate of the commission under the constitution. Yeah. As far as voting is concerned, I remember Mutemi said something like Kriegler said it is difficult to know who voted. I think what he said, it is difficult to know who won. Mm-hmm. But the voting, as far as the excess of voting is concerned, I think the commission, puts a very fair playing ground in terms of ensuring that everyone has access to voting, to the polling stations. They are normally open to everybody. It's for you to just wake up and go and vote. I remember Bono Mutemi also mentioned that, elections in our country is so competitive. And he also stated that, there's a lot of influence from out there. So as far as the commission is concerned, the things to do with the influence by the other stakeholders is really something that we need to have a conversation about as Kenyans, mm-hmm. as opposed to as a commission.
Let me just, we might want to have a conversation as Kenyans, but it is your constitutional mandate to ensure that the elections are simple, transparent, efficient, inclusive. The question is quite simple, Wakili. Can you guarantee that today, can the IBC guarantee that come August the 8th, 2022, and the days after that, we will have the election that every Kenyan here and every Kenyan across the country really hopes for and is as espoused in the Constitution?
I was actually getting there before you said you're jumping the gun. What I was going to say is that if you probably took time to actually see even a simulation of the voting process, it is very simple and very, transparent. I will tell you that even in the polling station itself, the way even the arrangement, the setup itself is deliberate, so that everybody is assured of, having a good, view of whatever is happening. And usually we'll have agents of political parties in place. I can assure you, without any fear of contradiction, that as far as the voting itself is concerned, it is a very, very transparent and straightforward exercise.
How about the result?
What would you like me to say about the result?
The result also has to be underwritten by the IBC that we can believe. And I think the reason why people are laughing is because every time the IBC has come to announce results, specifically the presidential result, there is no belief or there are questions about the validity, the veracity of that result. And that's also within the province of the IBC. So we've dealt with the voting, simple, transparent, efficient. How about the result? Can you guarantee that the result, as far as the IBC can possibly humanly do, will be the credible result that reflects the will of Kenyans?
Thank you very much. That is very directly tied to voting. Since that voting is transparent at the polling station, because it's actually impossible to do anything, because everybody is represented there, so that whatever goes to the ballot, everybody sees, and all those agents have to sign the form to actually confirm that that is the result. And by pronouncement of the court, it was actually held that result at the polling station will be final.
Yes.
So up to that point, I think as a commission, the same result is what is supposed to be declared at the tallying center. So if you ask me from where I sit, there's really no possibility that a different result will be declared.
Okay, my final question about that. We're going to likely hold the elections in the context of COVID-19. You and I are wearing masks to affirm the fact that this pandemic is still with us. And given that the final result is at the polling station, that all Kenyans, I think, have mandate or have the right to be able to go and verify. Because once results are counted and the returning officer has announced them, they're supposed to be posted outside the polling station. Are there guarantees that we will be able to verify for ourselves everywhere that result is really what has been posted? Because saa zingine watu wanaambiwa mpigeni kura muende nyumbani, right? But these kinds of elections are too important for people to just go home and leave in the hands of, and I'm sorry, an electoral commission that has been proven in court to have failed us before. So what guarantees can we get from the IBC that the public will be engaged with the process to the extent that people are allowed to go and see the result for themselves after voting?
Well, as far as guarantee is concerned, I don't take it from me. The commission has really nothing to hide. And obviously within the precincts of the polling station, it is not practical that everybody will be milling around there after voting. So they're likely to be asked to leave. But that is the reason we have all interested parties, represented there in the form of agents. We also have observers, some of, even international observers. So as far as the integrity of the result is concerned, what will be declared is what will be posted, and the public will have access to it. That's a guarantee.
All right.
It can't be otherwise.
All right. Let me just push on to two final questions for Mutemi and for Robi before we invite members of the audience. If you have any questions right now, it would be the time to start thinking of them, and the microphone will be passed around once you raise your hand. But the two final questions are really about the issue of capture, right? So there have been various statements, lots of stories about the question of capture of various institutions, right? Robi, I want to talk to you about two key institutions in government, legislature and of course the judiciary. Can you speak to what the status is with regard to capture of these institutions and the outputs that they're supposed to deliver on behalf of the public representing democracy?
Thanks, John Allan. So I think capture is such a complex thing. I'll be very honest. Some of it is something I hear in terms of stories. They don't seem very real, right? And from your work at African Censored, there are also some stories you've had that are quite shocking, right? But speaking to the legislature and just going back to Article 1 that Njoki had spoken about, that we are sovereign and we can exercise that sovereignty either directly or indirectly through our representatives, right? And every 5 years we hold elections. Now, whether those elections are representative of what we voted is also a different question that Michael has spoken about. But when that happens, I think there's a bit of a disconnect. And I'm speaking about this from for example, my local member of parliament. Now, I would say I am relatively informed. I have his phone number, and sometimes I share my thoughts on what I think about issues that are going on in parliament. But to be quite frank, I have never, had him speak about it or share anything of that sort. And sometimes, even depending on the barazas that he has within the constituency, which don't happen a lot, but even based on those interests that the public shares with him, what he votes in parliament is totally different. If there's a bill or a bill that they're talking about, what he presents there, it's totally different, and is aligned mostly to either the political party that he's in or an ongoing conversation that's going on. And I think the best example for this was during the revenue allocation conversation at the Senate and the National Assembly. I think we all saw the whole one voter, 1 shilling, there were different shades of opinion, but from the public, I think what stood out was what we want is equality. I don't think the public was sort of struggling about how much do I get versus Njoki. I think the conversation was how can we make a society that's totally equal based on the Constitution, affirmative action, and building up on historical injustices and contexts. But it then got to a conversation where I think Senator Malala had issues about receiving some money, and this is, I think, something he also spoke about at some point. His life is at risk. He was arrested at some point. And so that speaks to, wondering, this is my senator, why is he going through a lot of reprisals because of being a senator? What has he done, or what should I do to sort of support him or not, right? And I think the issue of state capture then limits us from exercising that sovereignty through these representatives who should ideally be speaking for us to the largest extent possible, right? And there are many ways of doing this. One of those is public participation, which I think has a very huge disconnect right now. And maybe even while, Michael is speaking, for example, one of my concerns is, he mentioned that the IEBC did a strategic plan. The question I have is, by a show of hands, how many participated in any of that process at any point? I didn't.
Well, Michael, that is data that you can take back to the IBC about the number of people who participated.
Yes, and rightfully speaking, while they might have hosted the National Youth Council, again, how representative is that sample size compared to, for example, Githurai Social Justice Center and the number of young people that they interact with daily, right? So I think there's a bit of a disconnect, and this is, this sort of links to also the state capture. Who do they consult before they make decisions? Because I have not been consulted about most of the stuff that happens. Most of the times I see polls happening, and I keep wondering, the only polls I think I see that are legit are what Mutemi does on Twitter. In 24 hours, you have a bit of responses, and it feels quite representative.
Yeah.
But I have never, for example, even with the National Assembly, the public participation that happens feels to be very targeted. And I've tried at some point to get into one of those rooms, but it feels like they have a select list of people who will attend, people who will speak, and the report that will be put out. So I've tried to get into those spaces, but it's very secluded. And most of the time, and this is, I think, where the social justice movements are now coming up, because I'm in some of those WhatsApp groups, you would see ideally every day a screen grab of the newspaper saying there's a public participation happening on this. Let's focus to attend. Now the question is whether putting that advert on the newspaper is, how many people would it reach, for example? I don't read the newspaper daily, right? So are there different ways of getting information to as many people as possible? And WhatsApp groups and social media is a very strong tool. But some of these institutions, even their social media, is not very strong. So for example, on matters to do with the legislature, I sort of go to Mzalendo, is it Mzalendo? That puts out, sort of tweets or has statements of what's happening. I don't see that on the National Assembly's, sort of page. When you try to look for the Hansard from a week ago, you're told they're still being typed out, and you might see them maybe months later after the bill has passed or an act has passed. So how much information are we getting as citizens, and how much space is there for us to contribute and share our values? And also, when we contribute, what happens to those things that we speak of or say? Because sometimes they've already decided, so when you speak, it's just, okay, we'll take those down, but nothing happens on the last sort of document.
All right. Mutemi, same question about state capture. How do we get out of this? How do we cement the gains that we've made as a democracy away from the people who would use these kinds of systemic ways to undermine our democracy?
It's quite a difficult question. I think so many people have been grappling with it. Manifestation of state capture, just from the example that you gave of public participation, was the BBI process, and they passed through county assemblies. And I remember a specific case, I think it was the Tana River County Assembly, which advertised for public participation tomorrow, but passed the bill today. So the advert was in the papers the following day, but they had already passed the BBI, and that capture is that whereby you kowtow to the party. The party, the president has given MCAs car grants, so they just pass. They haven't even read. In fact, at some point, when the bill came back to Parliament, there were two bills, different bills in the Senate and in the National Assembly. And I think those guys were not even ready, because they were being given whatever amount of money to vote in a certain way. Before this current Parliament has been able to assert itself, mostly. I remember even during the Grand Coalition government, when Marenda was a speaker and ODM was in the opposition, although the government was a government of national unity, they would stop. The Parliament would refuse to push some of the bills that the government was pushing, and even some of them that were being pushed by the opposition, of which Marenda was part of the opposition. So the Parliament asserted itself as a second or third arm of government, which the judiciary is doing right now with some of these judgments. Equal arm of government. I think even as a people, we have not really internalized the fact that the executive, the judiciary, and Parliament are supposed to be equal arms of government, each with its own mandate, the executive make policy proposals, Parliament to pass those laws, and the judiciary to ensure enforcement of those laws and adjudicate in case there are disputes. So we've not really internalized that. And that's where I think state capture comes in, because we are still used to this system whereby the president in Kusema, you know, we had an imperial president, and once, starting from Jomo Kenyatta, who just, I think he fought at Nyayo of the colonial government, then Moi fought at his Nyayos, was a state that was created to extract and take to the UK, you know, for the Queen. So, you know, where we built roads, we built railways, where we built institutions, was where you could get resources from Kenya and Uganda and wherever, and ship them to Britain. Same thing is happening right now with the Chinese. The roads they're building, the railways, they're actually going to places where we have resources that will be transported to Mombasa and shipped to China or wherever. And so we have a government that then repurposes everything to fit that narrative, to serve that narrative. We have a highway that you're building here in the expressway. That is, right now I was just reading a story in The Nation that according to the Chinese, it's gonna cost 7 billion more. No consultations, nothing. I mean, just a statement, as in their statement, they're saying this thing is gonna cost.
And in the same paper on the same day, there's a Canadian expressway that's being pulled down because it didn't have the effect that was desired.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
You know, and if you look at even the justification for SGR, which the World Bank had said would cost to revamp the old railway, which you were lied to by a very efficient propaganda machine that was built in 1902. What they didn't tell us is that the railway was rebuilt in 1947 after the World War. So the railway that you had was rebuilt in 1947, but the propaganda kept saying, you know, this railway was built in 1902. And the World Bank study said, if you want to expand, first of all, what is SGR? Standard gauge rail, what does it mean? SGR was a US thing, whereby John Allan had his railway, Mutemi had his railway, there were different gauges. So if I came with the goods with my train to your region, I'd have to, you know, things will have to be offloaded from my railway to your railway. So Americans say, let's standardize this railway. Let's have the same gauge across the country. That's what standard gauge railway is. Before we built this so-called SDR, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania had a standard gauge rail, 1 meter gauge, whereby trains could come, leave Mombasa and go all the way to Rwanda. So we didn't need an SDR. But then they said, what you need to do is add an extra railway on one side. If you did wider bogies, add an extra railway on one side, and the same route could, you know, that was going to cost 20 billion. But you see, the powers that be would not have made the money they needed to make. So during the Raila Kibaki Grand Coalition government, the project was inflated to cost 120 billion. And World Bank withdrew from it. They said, you're not going to be part of this. And then when Uhuru and Ruto came, they repurposed it, and it was the same project cost 320 billion. Yeah. Where is the rest of that money? Where did it? And that's Nairobi to Mombasa. The thing was supposed to cost
until Malaba,
all the way to Malaba.
Yeah.
So state capture, that is state capture, is repurposing government projects so that you can put money in people's pockets.
For private
interest.
Whether
it's the Chinese, whether it's the president and the deputy president and all the people in government. So how do we deal with this? Lastly, I would talk about, if you see anything French in this country, and the French have started coming here from 2013, the first major project for the French was procurement of
the kits.
The kits. That is alleged to be a Kenyatta venture. Anything French, including like the Uchumis have closed down, Nakumat has closed down, now we have Carrefour, which is French, the one major supermarket, and many other things. Peugeot is back. NTSA bought Peugeot cars. They buy, like, that is state capture, is whereby you're repurposing government to serve private interest. NMS, okay? The only thing Sonko did was refuse to buy cobblestones from the Kenyatta family company, Koto and whatever, and Clearworks. And so he was pushed out. And then a deputy governor who we have recorded, Sonko actually recorded Uhuru's sister, asking him to appoint that lady who's Kananu now, the current I don't know whether it's acting or governor or whatever, it's not clear. And the first thing she did was sign the bill releasing 40 million to NMS. That's state capture. So that you talk about beautiful pavements, that's good, but who's supplying those pavements?
Yeah.
And all this construction is the Kenyatta family. You know, that's state capture. What do we do about it? We have to talk about it like you're talking right now. And you have to be courageous. Most probably I'll leave you and get arrested for saying what I've just said. But we have
I
to
certainly
be
hope not.
You have,
Yes.
to keep, you have to keep saying these things. You have to
Yeah.
speak this truth.
Yeah.
That is state capture. And you have to assure Uhuru, whether he disobeys court orders during his tenure, we will revisit after he leaves the presidency. And we will jail him.
Mutemi, there are lots of things in there that I'd love for us to be able to fact check, especially when it comes to the NMS and all of that. Very interesting submissions, but yes, stuff there to really look into. I want to switch now to, with permission of Mr. Songora, our moderator for the day, to just give a few minutes to members of the audience to ask any questions that they have to the panel before we conclude this first panel. If anybody has a question or a comment, you can just raise your hand and the microphone will come to you. So there's a guy there in the center.
We have 1, 2 over there, 3 here, the gentleman far behind.
Yeah, so those are 4 questions. We'll take 2 rounds of the same and then we'll come back, have them responded, and then we
Helena.
close. Okay, so let's start with whoever is closest.
Thank you. My question is to the IBC. I looked up a fact, and it was said that per voter, $5 are required for that vote. But in Kenya, we use $25 per vote. I think your institution is one of the many institutions that are hemorrhaging money. So I'd like to know, these $20 extra, where does it go? Because even the US is using $5.
What's your name? You didn't tell us your name.
My name is Omboyo Kello from Get the Right Social Justice.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, Michael, just note that down so that we can go through all of the questions and then we'll come back.
Good afternoon. My name is Wayaki from DCJC. My question is touching on what she's just asked concerning the elections to come. Well, she said that the elections are quite expensive, it's true, because we buy expensive kits from abroad, we print our ballots abroad, our ballots have more security features than currency. In my view, I think that the reason why the election is expensive is because of the mistrust that we have in Kenya. Either we don't trust ourselves, or we don't trust the IBC, or we don't trust our politicians and all that. So my question is, why do you think there exists that mistrust in the electoral processes, and what would you propose as redress, or what can we do to redress that mistrust? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so about two more questions, then we'll go to the second round. So, yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. Okay, my name is Andrew. I just want to speak to the IBC, humbly asking them to just review what they are going to appeal, because BBI was a monster that was coming to pull us back. Because I feel that IBC, you're trying to play being a puppet of the executive. So I just want to ask you, just go and revisit what the Court of Appeal gave you, and I believe you'll come out new IBC and you'll see a change from you. So through your office, we'd like to see a very good election based on young people, because we young people, we have suffered and we have said enough is enough. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. One last question, and then we can come to the panel. There was a gentleman who had raised his hand first there.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ben Lucas, alias Msiresi. I've got two questions, one directed to the judiciary, and the other one is to the IEBC. Now, to the judiciary. We've seen there is a wrangle, the wrangles between judiciary and the executive. Former Chief Justice Honorable Maraga, last year we saw what happened when he appointed some judges. The president did not allow or compile with him. So, to Mr. Judiciary Man, the lawyer, what is bringing all this, or what is the cause? What could be the cause of all this?
Yeah.
When two arms of governments cannot agree? To the IEBC, they say when you want to construct, huwezi enda kujenga nyumba mwenzako kama hujajenga yako. We saw former IEBC member Roslyn Akombe left the group. We saw what happened between the chairman, Chebukati, and the former, I don't know if it's the former or what, Chiloba. When Chiloba wrote a letter and said that he was not akufukuzwa kwa njia nzuri inafaa. So, Mr. IBC, how will you convince us that the next 2022 general elections will be free and fair when your house itself is not organized? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick note, yes, Robi is a lawyer. I don't think he's part of the judiciary, and Michael, as Director of Legal Affairs, will try and answer from his perspective and using his role. So most of the questions were directed to you. Let's start with you, and then we'll come to you, Robi. Let's go ahead.
Thank you. I actually expected most of the questions to be directed at me, but I'm not going to answer any question on state capture. Anyway. Thank you very much, Mboyo Tieno. I'll combine your question with Wayaki's because I think they're related. I agree. Elections in Kenya are very expensive. I think Wayaki has attempted to answer that question for me. There's a lot of mistrust in this country, so that and the reason we have too many laws is I think you can see there's an attempt to legislate trust, because they really totally don't trust each other. And the ballot papers, as he said, have so many security features, you could actually use them as currency. But basically it is because of that mistrust. Maybe it's a culture thing. I don't think that's really for the commission to sort out as a commission. But I agree that the other areas that probably something could be done about, for instance, you know, the law has capped the number of voters per polling station at 700, which makes it expensive, because you know, probably if it was staggered or maybe increased, that would be a bit better, because maybe we'll even have less polling stations. Because now what we have is that it will obviously increase the number of polling stations. It will increase the number of workers, for instance. What the commission does during elections, for instance, is recruit up to 400,000 casual staff. In other countries, I'm aware that some of the people who offer their services do it on voluntary basis. So that also has the effect of reducing the cost of elections. But that's a conversation that I agree we must take forward as a country, to reduce the cost of elections.
The final one was about cleaning house.
There's somebody who has a question about BBI.
Yes.
And I think it's been alluded to before.
It was a comment, really, yeah.
Okay, fine. But maybe the clarification I might want to give is that the Commission is not fighting the BBI. I think my colleague here have talked about
I think not fighting it, but supporting it by going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Yes, I just reproduced it, but I know he didn't mean it in a bad way. But basically what I want to say is that what the Commission was concerned about was the effect of that decision for the past resolutions that were made. That's it. It is not fighting the process. It's not fighting the findings, or challenging the findings of the Court of Appeal as far as stakeholder engagement is concerned, voter registration, voter education is concerned, because I agree, those pronouncements are meant to make the Commission better. But as far as that appeal is concerned, it's basically limited to just that one limb of the issue of quorum, because it would actually, result into a constitutional crisis if some of those decisions were undone. About cleaning house, well, we have new commissioners who've just been appointed. I think this is about their 4th day or 5th day in office. Obviously, the issue of quorum is now moot. But as far as, relationship with the boardroom going forward, I believe that we will, there'll be a lot of understanding the commissioners definitely will work together.
Okay.
And we will deliver a credible election.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael. Robi, Mr. Judiciary Man, it's your opportunity.
Thanks a lot for that question. I also like him as a speaker. He's very clear. But just to speak to what is, and I think his question is, what is causing this push and pull between the executive and the judiciary mostly, is, going back, and I think we mentioned the 2017 general election and what came out of that. And just to speak to what the best case scenario should be, is that all these three institutions should be working together to make sure that we get the best out of the country, right? But if that is not happening, then it means that we are being affected by that push and pull. That in the last, with the former Chief Justice Maraga, he was very clear about what he wouldn't want for the executive to do. So pronouncement from the executive about certain judges, Maraga would clearly say, do a formal complaint to the Judicial Service Commission, and that will be taken into account. Don't make roadside pronouncements about judges without providing clear evidence or clear statements about how they have been ineffective or corrupt or inept. But to go back to what Mutemi had spoken about, state capture, and I think this also links to what's happening in the judiciary right now. There's a level of control that the executive wants to have, which is something that we should have done away with when we passed the constitution, right? Which means that right now things should be decentralized to a large extent, and there are clear procedures that you would use to then, sort of disagree with some issues and fight some issues. Now, my sense, and this is my own personal view about what is going on now, is that over the past few years, we've seen the judiciary being very strong when it comes to, for example, human rights and fundamental freedoms, when it comes to going back on projects that are being done without, clear procedures in terms of procurement, procedures in terms of appointments of, individuals to various offices. And so to a large extent, I think the executive feels that the judiciary is sort of stopping our agenda. Now, whether that agenda relates to us is neither here nor there, but that, I think, it's a huge cause, and just how the president behaved after the High Court ruling on the BBI by not appointing 6 judges, some of whom were part of the court quorum in the High Court case, felt a bit targeted, and to be honest, I think irresponsible for the president to do something of that sort without providing, clear instructions. And then I don't know if I could ask a question as a panelist.
Yeah, sure.
So the question, and maybe Michael, you could answer this later on. Right now, young people are out to take positions and change the country, as Njoki rightfully said. And IEBC, I take IEBC as being a referee. Well, there are other stakeholders, but you are the main referee as far as elections are concerned. Now, in the last election, I think there were very different issues in terms of discrimination and creating a fair and equal, space for campaigns to go on. And even just recently, with the figures you provided for how much it would cost for people to go for office, in my view, they seem to be very high. And so what that means is there would be very many chances of unfair play or unfair practices. So in this next election, what does the IEBC have planned out to make sure that they're providing a very fair and equal space with very clear and open practices, electoral practices, in the sense that a young person doesn't have to be beaten up, for example. We've seen cases of women being beaten up because they want to get into spaces and talk to constituents. And I think the IBC has a very strong role to play in that, not even security-wise, but even creating like a guidance towards safe practices.
Okay, Mutemi, you have a question as well?
Yeah, for Michael. We got a judgment in 2017 that had very specific instructions, including access to your servers, which you did not allow. How do we trust you? Kama mjafungua server.
Come again?
How do we trust you if you cannot comply with the Supreme Court ruling to allow access to your servers? How do we trust you in the following subsequent elections?
Yeah. All right, Michael, so you can answer the two panelists' questions. Then we'll come for one last round, and then that'll be it, okay? So, Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. Wakili, yes. The Commission plays a central role in making sure that we have, access. We have a, level playground for everybody, including the youth. And from where I sit, I believe, for instance, the nomination fees for the youth, I think, has been brought down just to enable them access. As far as, I think your question made reference to campaign financing.
Not just financing, anything involving elections. Public participation is one of them.
Yes, but there's something that he alluded to do with the amounts of money that were published by the Commission for one to participate in in the various offices. I think one thing that we need to clarify, there's a misconception that for you to run for president you need 5 billion. For you to run for one to run for governor they need 3 billion. That is basic. Those are basically limits. You might as well have no money. If you can convince the electorate, then you will run. I think we need to we need to understand that, so that you don't expect somebody like John Allan Namu, for instance, to spend 20 billion because he'll hold. I don't use capture. I mean, he can fund everything and buy that position. That is really the essence of setting the limits for campaign financing. Because then again, once there is no limit, then it means we'll affect the very democracy that we are talking about in this forum. But as far as access is concerned, obviously the Commission is open to the youth, and it does everything possible to make sure that there is participation, including the issue of peace, not necessarily involving police, but just the awareness. We have a lot of voter education going on, and we target the youth a lot. One thing we also need to know is that even if it's not the issue of security in terms of police as such, the Commission is usually in charge by law of a polling, I think within 400 meters of the polling station, so that even the police are supposed to be answerable to the returning officer. That is one thing that probably we need to understand, but obviously it's a conversation we are having with the other stakeholders. There was also another question about
Kufungua server.
Kufungua server. Mutemi. The server was opened. It was open, but probably what is out there in the domain is maybe some pronouncement that was made by a senior counsel who alluded to the fact that some people are, but anyway, let's not get there. But I can assure you that the server was opened. I think the law has been amended to provide for, I'm not an IT person as such, but a local cloud. So the idea of saying that people out there, the time difference will not arise again. But the server was opened.
Okay, are you satisfied
is that
with
information public?
Which information?
That the servers were opened.
That the servers are open, or what data was found within those servers?
Yes, I am reliably informed that actually there are representatives even from the players, the main players, who actually came to the Commission offices and they were given access It was actually.
So can the public access that information? Is it somewhere where I can go onto a website and look at that information?
I don't know whether it's on the. Is it supposed to be on the website?
Well, is it publicly accessible?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
The public. I mean, the commission really has nothing to hide. We are a public institution, and if anybody wants any information, they just need to request. Obviously, the information will be provided. Obviously, in keeping with the other laws as to maybe the Data Protection Act and the Right to Information Act, Access to Information Act, but whatever is readily available and without any limitation is easily accessible.
Okay.
You just need to request and you'll get it.
All right. Now, final
Allan,
round of questions.
Allan,
Nicholas, you have something?
Yes, there are a couple of questions here, but before, we also have people following us online. It's good also to pick 2 or 3 questions from them. I know it's taking time. Before that, I want to give an opportunity to Helena here. She had a question. You can wait. Okay, thank you. And then we'll come back to her and Jackson Obare here, Regional Manager for MCF. Online, there is a question from one gentleman here, known as he was asking Bob, gentleman known as Bob. He was actually asking whether IEBC has enough resources now that we have COVID-19, if IEBC is well prepared to ensure there are credible elections come 2022. Apart from that, I know most of the others are just comments. So I think we need to shift so many hands here.
Yeah, so let's keep it to a maximum of 4 questions. Unfortunately, whoever will be number 5, you'll have to keep your question until later.
Okay. So now we have 1.
To the gentleman who's standing up, because you've asked a question, let's give an opportunity to someone else.
Okay, so if you spoke in the first round, you need to give an opportunity for others. So we have a gentleman here, straight to the point.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Moduyo Kennedy, and I'm glad to be here. I think I want to start by registering my disappointment towards the Mr. Michael from IEBC, because the first thing for him to come here and tell us he's not versed with the statistics as far as the number of the youth is concerned, I think it's a bit of a disappointment. And I don't think we can have a conversation with someone who doesn't even know our impact and our numbers as far as electoral processes are concerned. The second one is for him to say he's not sure if the server is supposed to be open for the public. I think it's a bit of, I have a feeling that IEBC do not have the right staff to do their job, and I think it can tell as to what is happening. I think then I have to point out something. One of the reasons why people do not have trust is because for some of us who have been very involved and following on electoral issues, if you listen to the language of IEBC in 2013, 2017, and on BBI, you cannot differentiate it from that of the executive. Because even at this moment, it's like the IEBC is following the instructions of the Attorney General. Now I have 3 questions. I have a question now.
Let's keep it to 1 question, given that you've made your comment. Eh?
Okay. Now, I think as a person, I'm also an aspirant in the coming elections. And I think this is where now my main concern is. We have people who have been campaigning since 2013. And that is a disadvantage to some of us who are outside. Now the question is, IEBC is purporting to be following the law and procedures. At what point do you regulate these people so that for some of us who are outside and want to come in are not disadvantaged because this state process campaign, and then you have something you call the campaign period. What is the campaign period? And yet we see people campaign every day here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a lady here. Here. Straight to the point, please.
Okay, my name is Sylvia Uko from Githurai Social Justice Center. I would like to disagree with Michael that the youth are greatly involved in IEBC. And my question is, in the recruitment process, especially in these polling stations, there's a notion that is back uko kwa ground that those who did the past, our clerks, assistant clerks, are the ones who are going to do the same job this year. What about, we have new graduates every day. So what about those who are who did not get this opportunity last time and are qualified to do the same jobs this time?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have two more questions. Two more questions.
Two more questions, and
yeah,
we wrap up here.
All right. Okay, my name is Jalja Loyamo. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to take 2 minutes max if I'm allowed.
No, just one question.
Okay,
please.
1 minute.
Just one question.
Okay. I'll start with a comment. If you asked me, the problem is not about who is in power, whether it's the old or the younger, because what I believe in, it's a matter of culture, the culture we're having and the competency of the leaders, whether they are old or young. Like if you look at US, we've never seen the youth in US complaining about their governance because the structures and the policies set in place doesn't favor who is in power, whether young or old. So in regards to that, in our country, we'd find like politicians do not obey the court orders. Because in a government, we have three structures. We have the executive, the judiciary, and the parliament, right?
Legislature,
yes.
Legislature,
yeah. So you find the executive, let me talk about executive. The executive disobeys the judiciary. And the legislature is supposed to be our watchdogs are in the pockets of the same executive. And even the forces, the security forces are even in the pockets of the executive. So what will happen to us, the common mwananchi? Because I believe, my personal belief is that sovereignty of the people is overrated. Because you see, now our power is limited to only elections. But when it comes to now, after we've elected, we can't decide what kind of we can't decide the kind of leaders they will be. Because what we only elect them on the basis of what they tell us during the campaigns.
Yeah.
So my question is to the legal guy, what happens now that someone from the executive has disobeyed the court orders, and the parliament cannot do its work, and now again the security forces are in the pockets of the same executive. So what will happen?
All right.
In short, I'm asking: is revolution legal? Is it a legal practice, or what will happen?
Okay. Thank you very much. To the last question now.
The last gentleman is here. Straight to the point.
Oh, good evening, guys. My name is Otieno Oscar from Danora Community Justice Center. So my question revolves around our beautiful lady here. So you see here in Kenya, presidency is much based on supremacy of families. You see the board, son and father were both presidents. And you see by next year, it's evident that, to my point, this guy, Raila, will take. Then 10 years to come, Gideon will take. And then this champion will have sons. So you see, it's evident that their sons definitely will domain the presidency. So my question is, when will this sickness get cured? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Joki, you mind starting with that question?
Okay. Thank you for that. I think therein lays our role as a youth of this country to change the conversation from, this royal kind of family conversation to what actually matters. And the conversation should be the class struggle. you know. And I think there's so many things that I do not agree with the dynasty versus hustler narrative that is going round at this particular time, especially because those who purport to be hustlers are not real hustlers, because we do not have hustlers who come to meetings with helicopters, really. But the genius is that it has shifted the conversation from the tribal gods to the economic conversation of this country. And that is the conversation that we who are the legit, the legit masses of this country should run with, the class struggle, conversation. Because if I sit here and I start having a conversation about, the economy, we will all relate, because that is where we all are. So when will that happen? Now. Those conversations are happening now, because there's a generational shift where people in their 30s and below do not even identify with their tribe. So it would be really, troublesome telling Njoki to vote as a Kikuyu, yet Njoki has lived in Githurai where there are all these other communities. So that tribal angle will not really make sense to her. But if you come and talk about, my hustle, if you come and talk about my struggle, being a youth and being a Kenyan, then it will make sense to me. And those are the conversations that we all need to have. Where, as Njoki, if I come and say I am going to vie as the MCA of Githurai, you will actually relate and say, enyewe ni mse wetu, tumecheki struggle yake, and you will not start asking me, so what is in it for us, what do you have to offer us? You will not, have those questions for me. So when we change and have these conversations on things that we relate to, and that is, the economic struggle, that is the class struggle, then we'll be headed to the right direction.
All right, fantastic. Mutemi, do you have any question or any responses on that question as well?
It's a very good question, and as Njoki has articulated, just maybe add to what she said, is that regardless of what happens in 2022, and in advantage or not, and I think it was very deliberate what the Ruto campaign has done, is that we have shifted from the politics of tribe to economics or class struggle. Whatever happens in 2022, it will be the last time any one individual or tribal baron is able to mobilize their community in this country. Uhuru Kenyatta, if he goes home, if he agrees to go home, or Raila Odinga, whether he's elected or he's not, there's nobody who has the kind of power these guys have exercised in the last few decades, who's able to mobilize. Even Ruto cannot mobilize his community the way these guys have been able to do. So that is changing. And then what you're going to create, and is what Njoki is inferring to, are tribes based on economic interests. Dairy farmers, coffee farmers, border guys, mama mboga, which is the language that is there. So people will unite around their tumbo yao, because that's what your politicians do. And Kenyans are waking up. That's the political education Njoki is talking about. Difference between civic education. Civic education tells you these are your rights, these are you vote, this is what the constitution says. Political education tells you how you vote determines whether you sleep hungry today or not because of X, Y, Z. That's political education. It's connecting the dots, helping you connect the dots between your status, your stature as a person, and whether you're jobless, whether you're sleeping in a shack, or you're sleeping in a two-bedroom mansion. That is how you play your politics. And Kenyans are getting there. The young people, actually the figures are much higher. It's not 65, it's actually 80 something. 80-something% of the young people of Kenyans are under 35, of which I think of that is where 65 are eligible to vote. In the next coming election, 2022, you will have over between 6.5 to 7 million people who will be voting for the first time. That's a presidential candidate. They can actually make Njoki the next president of Kenya if they decide to vote for Njoki, the young people, So what are you going, so answering our brother's question, what are you going to do to eliminate those dynastic narratives? You have the power. What are you going to do? Organize yourselves, join movements, and you can change this country. You can actually take, if you take those 6.5 million people who will be 18 for the first time, who will get IDs and get voters card for the first time next year, add maybe another 3 million who say they support Jubilee because they align tribally, or support ODM or NASA because they align tribally. There are people there who are there because they have nowhere else to go. So if you're able to convince them to come and join these young people, you can take power. You can take the power of this country.
True.
As long as they're able to count.
We'll come to you last because there are a lot of questions for you. Robi, any question? There was a question that was directed to you, I believe.
Yeah, I think what he was summarizing is simply state capture.
Yeah.
And when I began this, I said that what's great about where we are now is that we're waking up. A lot of people are learning that, it's all been a lie. Social justice centers are starting to talk to young children about history and politics and important, people that they can revere and people who were basically scams or are scams right now. And I think the first point of changing that state capture is acknowledging that there is state capture and calling it for what it is, not calling it, these are just interests of two people, no. And I think the other thing is state capture has been there for decades, and it won't take a day or a year for that to change. And I think that's where the organizing comes in and mobilizing others to understand that what we see on the news every day is not by chance. Most of it actually is not by chance. Most of it is, concocted information towards something. And that's what Mutemi calls narratives. Narratives are being built to make you think that, this is okay, we can work with this or not. And I think that's where speaking up then comes in. Are you able to talk to your MC and tell them that, let's not rush this project? Are you able to, call out your member of parliament when they receive bribes, and reports are done to show who received bribes to vote for what, right? And then lastly, and now this is where now the elections part come in, is understanding and taking some of these spaces strongly and speaking out in them. And I think this is why, Michael, a lot of us are very concerned about the role that IEBC has, because it then means that this is, if my vote is the only way I can change most of the things, if not all, then whoever is counting those votes, as Mutemi says, should be able to then tell me that, Robi, you voted at this polling station, and your vote made it here, and this is what it has done to change, your environment. And right now, I think now there's a trust issue that I think is important for the IEBC to then come in as a public institution to then make sure that the young man who's seated there and wants to vie feels safe, that if he gets into the ballot box, those that he has convinced to vote for him, their votes will be counted and will reflect onto his success or not.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Robi. To you, Michael. You have the last word based on the questions that were asked.
Thank you. There's somebody who asked about the availability of resources by the Commission in the face of COVID. Yes, obviously, COVID has changed the face of how we do things. Of course, it has increased the cost of elections to a certain extent, because now we have to think about PPEs. That has been factored into the budget, and come 2022, all COVID protocols will be followed. So rest assured that we'll be able to vote in a COVID, not free, but COVID compliant environment. There's a gentleman there who he was quite fired up. I didn't want to commit on the exact percentage of youth. All I wanted to state was that, to illustrate that the youth is in the majority. And as Mutemi says, if they wanted to vote for Njoki as president, they can. And I gave the example of the LSK. Basically, the youth have a lot of potential. That's the point I was trying to drive at. On the issue of
campaign period.
On the issue of the server. I actually stated that the server was opened. The server was opened. Maybe it did. But the server was opened. Well, he's complained about people campaigning over. Well, obviously that is not lawful, but some of this have to come to the attention of the commission for the commission to act. If somebody is campaigning in a certain place somewhere and the commission is not aware, then it would obviously not be possible.
Yeah. You're talking about the deputy president.
Exactly, yeah.
He's been campaigning since
2013.
Since 13th of August 2013.
Well, it's true. I mean, these are things that are undeniable. These are things that are on public media and various other platforms. Why does it, I guess the bigger question then is, why does it need to be brought to your attention when the IEBC is the arbiter that should be looking out for these kinds of offenses?
No, I was trying to, I thought maybe the gentleman has been affected somewhere where he's got interest, political interest. But as far as that particular bit is concerned, maybe John, maybe I'll respond next time because I don't want to. Anyway, somebody else asked a question about employment of the youth. I can tell you that when it comes to recruitment for issues to do with voter registration, registration clerks and polling clerks, the Commission deliberately targets the youth. Now, the issue of the youth who've worked before being given preference, it hasn't, that is not the policy. I know this recruitment has been decentralized to the constituencies, but I can assure you that's not the policy of the Commission. If it happens, it's unfortunate, and maybe that's something we will take up.
All right. Yes. Okay. With those comments, we're going to have to wind up this panel. Thank you very much, of course, to Njoki Gashanja from the Githurai Social Justice Center. Let's give her a hand. Michael Goa, Director of Legal and Public Affairs from the IEBC. Thank you very much, and coming and facing these questions. As you can see, there's lots more in terms of the trust deficit. That's a hill to climb for the IEBC. Please take that back to the Commission as well as to the Secretariat. And to you, of course, Robi Chacha, for representing the entire legal fraternity, advocate of the High Court. Asante sana. And finally, to you, Mutemi Kiama, a defender and a speaker on behalf of Wanjiko. Thank you very much for your sentiments this afternoon. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I know we are over time as per the schedule. Hopefully, we'll be given a bit of an allowance for you to all to have lunch and rejoin us for the second part of the day's activities and the panels that will be coming this afternoon and all throughout Democracy Week. Let's try and remember that each of us has a role to defend our democracy and also to look for solidarity from outside. The president of Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema, was elected because they started to organize a year out from the election, people in small groups. Kama kuna nyumba kumi, si pia kunaweza kuwa na kura kumi. You know, you go and you organize your people to go and vote, no matter how they vote, just for them to be able to get engaged in the process and defend our democracy. Asanteni sana. I think there'll be vouchers that will be given to you as you leave the auditorium. But thank you very much for listening. Asante.
All right. And we'll also wish to also appreciate Mr. John Allan Namu for the wonderful moderation. Tumpigieni makofi tafadhali. Again and again and again. Thank you.